I call Clayton Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I just would like to start New Zealand First's contribution today by just saying how disappointed New Zealand First is at the stance that this government's taking, particularly over this financial veto. This speech that I will be giving this evening, sir, is on three things. It's about democracy, the so-called unaffordability of the bill, and of course it's all about families, which is what Sue Moroney has put forward with her 26-week paid parental leave bill, sir. And I started off in the second reading saying that this was divine intervention because, of course, there's been three cracks at getting this across the line, and I thought, by the will of the gods, that this was clearly going to be the time that we were going to see some sense come through. And, sir, we've got democracy in the House when the majority of this House are in support of looking after their families, our families, others' families, New Zealand families, by extending that paid parental leave, which actually, sir, puts us, well, still well behind the eight ball when we compare ourselves to other OECD countries around the world. And the Minister, when he speaks about it, saying, oh, you know, you just can't cherry-pick information from the OECD, sir, but whenever he gets asked a question, in fact today in the House he was asked a question about employment, and he goes back to using those OECD figures that he likes to put his hat on and say that we're doing very well. Well, the reality is, sir, the stark reality is we are doing abysmally. We are right at the bottom of the OECD figures when it comes to the amount of money that's paid to families and the amount of time that we give our families. In fact, we are in the four bottom countries in the OECD when it comes to looking after families, sir. Mr Speaker, in 1943, a very, very great leader gave a fantastic quote. Winston Churchill famously said, "There is no finer investment for any community than putting milk into babies, sir." Now, 1943 was a very, very hard time, and finances were very, very tight, sir, because we were, of course, in the precipice of war and going through war times. But that quote there, sir, is a very, very important one because it demonstrates cost versus value, sir. When the priority of that government was to make sure that they could fight a war and stand up for democracy, sir, they were putting the priorities of their families first, making sure that those families and those communities were being looked after. They put the cost of a war aside for a moment to put the value of families and children. They weren't talking about fueling their airplanes, they were he was talking about putting milk into babies. This government says that we can't afford this bill. We say we cannot afford not to implement and support this bill. At a time that this country is seeing more and more disenfranchised families, disenfranchised youth who turn into disenfranchised adults, sir, who become dependent on one way or another on the state, or even worse, can go on to commit horrible violent crimes. We need to get to the grassroots of this problem. And this is a step in the right direction for a government to understand that families need to come first. They need to come first before you put $10 billion into your war fund. They need to come first when we talk about the money that is not being collected when we're talking about corporate taxation, sir. They made a one-line mention of it, the Finance Minister, in his budget this year, saying more needs to be done in this area. When you talk about affordability, what about the $1 billion that you gave to your South Canterbury finance mates? That money was found. We found $10 billion to go into our war coffers to make sure that that could be afforded. We could find $26 million for a flag referendum. I can carry on. $16 million to a Saudi businessman to build an abattoir in the Middle East. Yeah. What about the $540 million out of our future investment fund that's going into infrastructure in China? You can find the money when you want it, but you're not prioritising it for our families. And what about, sir, what about the $7.5 billion that's not currently being collected by corporate tax? The one area that would make it affordable, sir, you're not even putting any resources or energies into it. And the point's already been made that $110 to $115 million, and I'm going to read out this fiscal veto in a moment, sir, which will give you those numbers, because the last time we had Mr Hudson in the House, he was banging off all sorts of crazy figures. But, sir, this government can afford to pledge to the people that next year you can expect to see $3 billion in tax cuts, which is 0.03% of the $110 million that we're proposing to put into this family bill is 0.03% per year. Well, do the maths. I can tell you right now there's a lot of years supported by $3 billion that you're talking in a one-year tax cut. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to just take a moment to read out for the people back home that don't have the ability to get easily this certificate understanding order, the impact on fiscal veto. The proposed bill, it says, extends the duration of paid parental leave to a minimum of 22 weeks on the 1st of April 2017 and a maximum of 26 weeks on the 1st of April 2018. The proposed bill would impact on the Crown's fiscal aggregates by increasing the Crown total operating expenses by approximately $14 million in 2016-17, $72 million in 2017 and 18, $116 million in 2018 and 19, and $119 million in 2019 and 20. This is just because you haven't read it, Mr. Hudson. This amounts to $321 million over the forecasted period of 4 years. These figures are gross before tax, and therefore it is correct to note that the government will receive tax revenue back on a portion of this expenditure of approximately $43 million. The result is an overall net increase to the Crown's total operating expenses of $278 million over the 4-year period. Now, when the Minister yesterday was asked by Sue Moroney in the House around this very question, and he was, why did you put a fiscal veto on this bill? Because he said, well, actually, at first I thought it was $280 million per year. That's what he said. He said his initial thought was it was unaffordable because it was $280 million per year. Well, we're 4 times better off from his first prediction. That would be surely enough time to actually reconsider your position and support this bill, because it is more than affordable as we speak about the $278 million over that 4-year period. And now they go dumb and silent. They've got their heads in shame. And I feel very, very sorry for those members of the National Party who actually genuinely would like to support this bill but can't do it because they're held over the barrel and they have to toe the party line. And I do feel sorry for you, and I know there are a number of you over there, sir. Mr. Speaker, we heard and we saw and we read over 6,800 submissions leading into this bill through Select Committee, and 99% of those people are in full support of it, sir, because it makes sense. It's about putting our families first. It's about ensuring families can bond together. You know what, and we talk about mums because they're extremely important. In fact, the last time I spoke about Mother's Day and what a great day that was, and how important every single one of us make our mothers feel because they are so precious to us. But dads play an equal role, and we are seeing more and more dads getting more and more involved with their families, sir. And I have to say, the people in this room, in this house, are the lucky ones, because you are in a position to actually take some time out with your families. But what about those families that are in financial hardship, that don't get the same ability? This would enable that bond to be made tight with those family members, with those dads and those mums, with their babies, to make sure that we can break down this cycle of neglect, which starts at the root of the problem, which we are seeing like a festering sore in this country when it comes to family violence. When we see domestic violence, we need to be doing more to help our families out. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Speaker.
I call Simon O'Connor.